It was a Tuesday morning in Port Harcourt. The kind of morning where the air still carries the coolness of the night before, that brief window before the heat settles in and the city remembers itself. Inside, a black SUV moving through Rumola Road, Osas Idausa. Osas, to anyone who knew him, sat with his eyes on the window, not watching anything in particular, just looking at the city he had left behind. 5 years. That was how long he had been gone. He left Port Harcourt as a struggling civil engineer with a visa he had applied for 3 times, 2 bags he had packed and repacked the night before, and a wife who held his face in her hands at the airport and said, "Come back to us." He had kept that promise. Today was the proof. The contract he signed in Dusseldorf last month would set his family up for years. His account was fuller than it had ever been. He had bought a plot of land in Woji, paid outright, no installments, as a surprise. Ruth had always talked about a house with a proper gate and a small garden. Not a big one, just enough space to plant something and watch it grow. He had remembered that. He smiled to himself and looked out at the streets rolling past. His driver, Cosmos, kept his eyes on the road and said nothing. That was the thing Osas appreciated about him. The man understood that some silences were not meant to be filled. Osas picked up his phone. He had tried calling Ruth that morning before boarding. No answer. He told himself she was at the market or busy with something in the house. Ruth never kept the phone close when her hands were occupied. That was just Ruth. He tried her brother, Nonso, instead. It rang twice, then nothing. The call dropped without connecting. He set the phone down and didn't think much of it. What he was thinking about was the look on Ruth's face when she opened the door and found him standing there. He hadn't told anyone he was coming. He wanted that moment. He wanted to see her eyes go wide the way they used to, hear her name say it like she was catching her breath. 5 years. But they had spoken every week. He had sent money every month without missing once. He had held up his side of everything. The car turned onto their street. Osa sat forward. The compound came into view. The grey fence, the neem tree he used to park under, the blue gate he had painted himself the week before he left. Something felt off. He couldn't say what. The gate was open. A few neighbors were gathered outside. Nobody was talking. They were just standing there, the way people do when something has happened and no one has yet figured out how to begin saying it. Osas felt his chest tighten. "Stop here," he said quietly. He stepped out. One of the neighbors, Mama Blessing, who lived in the compound next door since before he and Ruth moved in, turned and saw him. Her face moved through something complicated. It wasn't joy. It wasn't surprise. It was the face of someone who had been carrying a thing they didn't know how to put down. She took one step toward him, then stopped. "Osas," just his name, barely above a whisper. And before anyone said another word, before any explanation, before any sentence was formed, something in the pit of his stomach already understood. He just didn't know the shape of it yet. But before we begin, please like and subscribe to this channel. Drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from. Let me take you back a little. Osas and Ruth got married the year he turned 31. No big wedding. Neither of them cared much for the show. What they wanted was the marriage itself, the life. He had his engineering work, small contracts, site supervision, the kind of jobs that kept them going, but never quite got them ahead. Ruth sold fabric from their sitting room, Ankara prints, lace, ready-made pieces she sewed herself. She had regulars who trusted her eye. It was modest, but it was hers, and she ran it with the quiet seriousness she brought to everything. They weren't the kind of couple that looked impressive from the outside, but up close, they were solid. When the Germany connection came through, a former classmate working with a construction firm in Dusseldorf, it was Ruth who told him to go. She said, "We've been waiting for things to change on their own. They are not going to. Go and make it happen." He asked if she was sure 3 times over 3 different nights. She said yes each time. On the morning of the flight, she held his face in both hands the way she always did when she was serious. She said, "Come back to us." He went. The first year nearly broke him. The cold, the language barrier, the loneliness that settled into his chest like something with weight. He worked long shifts, came home to a 1-room apartment, and missed Ruth in a way he hadn't prepared for. Distance, he discovered, was not manageable. You just survived it. But he sent money every month without fail, sometimes more than agreed. He called every Sunday. She always picked up, even when it was late her time, even when she was tired. Those calls were what made Monday possible. By year 3, his career had traction. Year 4, he was leading a team. Year 5, he was the one signing. Through all of it, he called, she answered. Until 4 months before he came home, when the calls started going differently. Ruth sounded distant, tired in a way that went deeper than busy. He asked what was wrong. She said it was nothing, the heat, the business had slowed. He believed her because she had never given him a reason not to. Then the weeks came when she didn't answer at all. He called her younger brother Nonso instead. Nonso always had something. She's resting. She stepped out. Her battery died. Each time, Osas pushed the unease down and told himself he would sort everything out the moment he landed. He had no idea what sorting it out would look like.
Mama Blessing held his arm with both hands. "Osas." Her voice was low and careful. "When did you land?" He said, "This morning." "What is happening? Where is Ruth?" She looked at him for a moment that felt longer than it was. Her eyes were already wet. "You don't know," she said, not a question. Something cold moved through him. "What not?" She glanced behind her at the open gate, then back at him. The 2 women standing nearby had gone quiet. "Where is my wife?" The words came out harder than he meant them to be. Mama Blessing pressed her lips together. Her chin moved once. "Ruth passed," she said softly. 7 months ago. Her heart. The sentence reached him, but his mind wouldn't take it in. It just sat there on the outside, waiting. He stood still. The sun was on his face and shoulders. Somewhere down the street, a radio was playing. A generator hummed. The completely ordinary sounds of a Tuesday in Port Harcourt. "That's not right," he said. "I spoke to her." 4 months before, Mama Blessing said. After that, she got worse very quickly. "We all thought..." She stopped. "We assumed Nonso had told you." Osas looked down at the phone still in his hand. The last message from Ruth's number was 8 months old. "Just got to the clinic. We'll call you later." He called after that. Nonso answered. "She's resting," he said. He called again 2 weeks later. "She's doing better," Nonso said. He called a 3rd time. "Improving," Nonso said. Osas stood at the gate of the compound where he and Ruth had lived, where he had painted that blue gate with his own hands the week before he left for the airport. And he tried to understand what he was being told. 7 months. Ruth had been gone for 7 months, and not one person had picked up the phone to tell him. He didn't collapse. He didn't shout. He just stood there, completely still, while the world around him continued at its ordinary pace. And one question, the only question, rose through everything else. How do you bury someone's wife and say nothing? He didn't go into the house that day. He got back into the car, told Cosmos to drive, and didn't say where. Cosmos pulled out of the street and drove without asking. They ended up at the waterfront near Opoka. Osas sat in the back and looked at the water and didn't say anything for a long time. He went through every message from Ruth's number, reading slowly, not looking for anything specific, just reading her words, the way she wrote, short sentences, sometimes voice notes, a single emoji when she was too tired for words. Her last message, just got to the clinic. We'll call you later. She never called. And Nonso had answered in her place week after week and said she was fine. He tried Nonso again now. 7 rings. Voicemail. He hung up without leaving a message. That evening, he checked into a hotel in GRA. He sat on the edge of the bed for a long time before he could lie down. He wasn't performing grief. He was simply inside it. And there was nothing to do but let it move through him at whatever pace it chose. What made it worse was the particular cruelty of the timing. He hadn't been given the chance to prepare. No call saying she was sick. No call saying she was getting worse. No call, come home, or even just come and say goodbye. Instead, 7 months of nothing, and then a neighbor's face at a gate on a Tuesday morning. He barely slept. In the morning, he went to sit with Mama Blessing. She told him everything she knew. Ruth had started looking unwell around the middle of last year, had visited the clinic quietly without making a fuss about it, had kept most of it from the neighbors until it became impossible to hide. By the time people in the compound understood how serious it was, Nonso had taken over managing her care. He told everyone he was in contact with Osas, that Osas knew, that Osas couldn't travel because of work. No one had a reason to doubt him. I should have called you myself, Mama Blessing said. I think about that. Osas told her it wasn't her fault. He meant it. He went to the cemetery alone that afternoon. Someone told him the section and he found the grave without much difficulty. There are some things you find because you have to find them, not because you know the way. The headstone was already in place. Her name, her dates, a small cross. He stood there for a long time. Then he turned around, walked back to the car, and told Cosmos he needed to find Nonso.
Nonso Eze was the kind of person who dealt with hard things by waiting them out. It was how he had always operated. Problems, if left alone long enough, had a way of becoming the new normal. People forgot, time moved, the sharp edge of a thing went dull eventually. That was the logic anyway. When Osas returned to Port Harcourt, Nonso's first instinct was to stay low. He told himself he would reach out once the dust had settled, once Osas had some time to adjust. He had been telling himself some version of that for 7 months. By the time Osas's calls started coming through, Nonso had stopped answering any number he didn't recognize. What he didn't know was that Osas had already moved in a different direction. Osas called an old contact, a man named Broom, who worked in financial compliance. He asked Broom to pull the transaction history on Ruth's account, going back 3 years, and to check whether any amendments had been made to the account signatories after their marriage. What came back was straightforward. 14 months before Ruth died, Nonso had been added to a second signatory to that account. In the 6 months following her death, 11 transfers had been made from that account to a separate number registered in Nonso's name. Osas had that information on a Thursday. On Friday, Broom called Nonso from an unfamiliar number, spoke about a construction investment opportunity. Short timeline, decent returns, the kind of thing that sounded worth showing up for.
Nonso arrived at the hotel restaurant on Saturday at noon, dressed like a man who expected a good meeting. He walked in, scanned the room, found the table, and stopped. Osas was already sitting there. The smile that had been forming on Nonso's face didn't complete itself. Osas, he steadied his voice. When did you... Sit down, Nonso. The voice was quiet, controlled. Nonso sat. Osas placed the transaction records on the table, then the account amendment form. He didn't slide them dramatically, he just set them down, the way you put something on a table that always belonged there. My wife died 7 months ago. You knew and said nothing. You kept answering my calls and telling me she was resting. And while I was still sending money for a home that was already empty, transfers were going out of her account to your number. He looked at Nonso directly. I need you to explain that to me. Nonso looked at the documents. His jaw walked silently. It's not what it looks like. Then tell me what it is. If this story is holding your attention, stay with it. What Nonso says next changes everything. And if you are not yet subscribed to Bola's Folktales, do it now and hit the notification bell. You don't want the next story to pass you by. Nonso was quiet for a long moment. Then his shoulders dropped, just slightly, like a man releasing something he had been holding upright by sheer effort. She asked me not to tell you, he said. Osas didn't respond. He waited. Ruth knew she was sick before I told you she was resting. The doctor had already given her the picture. She sat me down and made me promise not to call you until she knew whether she would recover. She said she didn't want you dropping everything and coming back for what might turn out to be nothing. She was protecting you. That's all she was doing. You should have called me, Osas said. I know, but she was my sister and she was dying and I was trying to honor what she asked. Nonso pressed his hands flat on the table. When she passed, I didn't call because I didn't know how to undo 7 months of telling you she was fine. I told myself every day that today I would do it. Then 7 months became the reason why I hadn't. The money, Nonso exhaled. Treatment, the clinic here, the hospital in Abuja, the cardiologist. Ruth had almost nothing saved. She had been putting everything into the house fund, into the business. When she got sick, there was no cushion. I used my own money first, and then what was in the account. He turned his phone toward Osas. Medical receipts, hospital invoices, pharmacy records going back 14 months, dates and amounts that lined up with every transfer. Osas picked up the phone and scrolled slowly. He set it back down. The anger he had been carrying didn't disappear, but it changed shape. When you believe someone stole from you and discover they were paying your wife's hospital bills, fury doesn't simply turn off. It becomes something harder and more complicated, something closer to grief wearing a different face. And beneath all of it was the thing that was truly breaking him. Ruth had known she was dying. She had managed it quietly. Doctors, receipts, clinic visits, a brother sworn to silence, while he was in Germany signing contracts and imagining the garden she would never plant. She had done it all to protect his focus, to not interrupt what he was building for both of them. Knowing it didn't make it easier. It made it harder. You were wrong not to call me, Osas said. Whatever she asked, I was her husband. The decision to come home or not was mine to make, not yours to make for me. I know, Nonso said. I didn't get to say goodbye to her. A pause. Do you understand what that costs? I didn't get to hold her hand. I didn't get to be there. You took that from me, not out of malice. I believe that. But you still took it. Nonso looked at the table. There was no answer to that because there wasn't one. I'm not taking this to court, Osas finally said. The receipts are real and I can see that. But I need you to understand clearly what was lost here. Not money, time. The chance to be present for my own wife. Nonso nodded slowly. What happens now? Osas asked. Osas stood and put the documents in his jacket pocket. Now I go and sit with my wife, and then we figure out what forward looks like. He went back to the cemetery the next morning, early, before the heat came. He brought nothing,
No flowers, no prepared words. He sat on the low concrete border of the grave, rested his arms on his knees, and stayed. He talked to her. He told her about Dusseldorf, the contract and what it meant, the land in Woji he had bought outright and kept as a surprise, the one she never got to hear about. He told her about the garden, the layout he had imagined every time she described what she wanted on a Sunday call, the gate, the covered entrance, the patch of ground she could plant in. He had pictured her out there on a Saturday morning, rearranging things that didn't need rearranging because she already had a vision in her head, and the garden just had to catch up to a plan already made. He missed that, the particular calm that only existed in her presence. He told her he was sorry he wasn't there when it mattered, not because it was his fault, but because the person you love deserves to hear it, even when there is no one left to receive it. He stayed for close to an hour. When he stood up, something had shifted, not healed, nowhere close, but settled enough that he could carry it without it carrying him. That evening, he went to Nonso. Nonso came to the door looking like a man held together by habit. He stepped aside and let Osas in. They sat in the parlor. I spoke to my lawyer. The account, the transfers, the failure to notify next of kin, there are real grounds to pursue this. Nonso sat still. I'm not going to, Osas said. The receipts check out. And Ruth would not have wanted me to spend years in court fighting her brother. He looked at him. But I need you to understand clearly what you took from me. Not the money, the chance to be there, to hold her hand, to say goodbye. Nonso nodded. His eyes were wet. What I want from you now is simple, Osas continued. Tell me about her last months, not the medical details. I've read the file. Tell me what she was like, what made her laugh, whether she talked about me. Something in Nonso's face finally came apart. He pressed his mouth over his, held it, then steadied himself. She talked about you every day, he said quietly. And they stayed there, the two people who loved Ruth in the two ways a person gets loved, as family and as the one she chose, talking until the generator cut and the room went dark, and neither of them moved to find a touch. In the weeks that followed, Osas moved through things deliberately. The first was the account. He sat with his lawyer, presented the receipts Nonso had provided, and had them independently verified against the transfer records. The numbers held up. The withdrawals matched the medical bills almost exactly. It wasn't theft. It was a man making decisions he had no authority to make, for reasons that were at least honest. The account was formally closed, the remaining balance returned to Osas, and the matter was documented and put away. The second was the hospital in Abuja. Osas filed a formal complaint against the facility for failing to notify the recorded legal next of kin, himself, of a patient's admission and death. The hospital responded that all communication had been routed to the person who presented himself as the primary family contact, which was Nonso. The hospital was cleared of direct fault, but Osas had the record corrected, and a written acknowledgement of the communication failure was placed on record. It changed nothing in any practical sense, but it was the truth, and the truth he had decided was worth the paperwork. The third thing was the hardest. He went to the small clinic near their compound, the one Ruth had visited first, quietly, 4 months before the end. He asked to see her file. They were hesitant. He explained who he was. They brought it. He read every page, the early notes, the referral, the follow-up appointments she had kept without telling him anything. Near the bottom of one page, in the margin, the doctor had written a short note in ink. Patient concerned about husband's work commitments abroad.
does not wish to cause disruption at this stage of his career. Osas read that line several times. He closed the file. He thanked the woman at the desk. He walked out to the car. He didn't cry on the drive back. He had already given grief its time. What settled in him now was something different. A clean, clear understanding of exactly who Ruth had been. And with it, a quiet decision that what she had protected was not going to be wasted. 3 months after he came home, construction started on the plot in Woji. Osas had been carrying the design in his head for years. Every Sunday call where Ruth described some detail she wanted, he had quietly filed it away. He remembered more than she probably knew. A covered entrance, a kitchen window that caught the morning light, enough yard to actually move in. He hired a local firm, showed up most mornings, made decisions like a man building something he intended to live in. He turned down the German company's renewal offer. He wasn't ready to leave again and maybe never would be. There would be other contracts. He was good at his work and people knew it. What he didn't have an endless supply of was time in one place, and he had already learned at great cost what it meant to spend too much of it elsewhere. He took on local projects, reconnected with people, rebuilt the ordinary texture of a life in the city he had left 5 years ago as a younger, more anxious man. Nonso stayed in his life, carefully, with work on both sides and conversations that were sometimes uncomfortable but necessary. Ruth would have insisted, and they both knew it. The house in Woji was done 7 months after ground broke. The morning Osas moved in, he stood at the gate for a while before going inside. The garden was just soil and markers. The planting hadn't started. The mango tree sat in its nursery bag at the side of the yard, small and patient. He walked through each room slowly, stood at the kitchen window, looked out at the bare yard, and let himself picture her in it, just for a moment. Then he went and put the kettle on. Mama Blessing came by that afternoon with a pot of ofe onogu and white rice, enough for 2, even though she knew it was just him. She set it down, looked around the rooms, and said the only thing that felt right. She would have loved this place. I know, Osas said. He ate at the kitchen table with the back door open. The sun was low over Woji. The air was cool. The tree was in the ground, and he was home. He was not healed. Grief like this doesn't fully heal. It just becomes something you learn to carry without letting it bend you. What he was, finally, was present, rooted, building forward on ground that still had her name on it. That was not nothing. That was, in fact, everything. There is one line in this story I cannot move past. A doctor's note written in the margin of a medical file does not wish to cause disruption at this stage of his career. Ruth was sick. She knew she was sick, and her first thought was Osas. Not herself, not her fear, not her pain. Him, his work, his progress. That is love. Real, sacrificial, quiet love. And it cost her the one thing she deserved most, to have her husband beside her at the end. This story is not just about loss. It is about the conversations we keep putting off because we think we are protecting the people we love. The check-ins we don't make, the hard truths we decide someone else isn't ready to hear. Sometimes that silence, however well meant, takes something it can never give back. Tell the people you love the hard things. Let them choose how to respond. That choice belongs to them. If this story moved you, I want to hear from you. Drop something in the comments. What you felt, what it reminded you of, what hit hardest. I read them all. A new story is coming to Bola's Folktales very soon. and it is one you will not want to come too late. Subscribe now and turn on the notification bell so it reaches you the moment it drops. And if someone in your life needs to hear something like this today, share it. You never know whose heart is waiting for it. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being here.